Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of The Turning Point. We have a lot to unpack today, and everything we're about to discuss is just going to tie us into the larger transitions that we see happening across the global financial system, from debt-based money to value-based settlement. So we're going to start right where we left off before we went live on this, and that's the government shutdown. I think it's important to note that most people are going to see this as a political gridlock, you could say, but in reality, it's more strategic. Government shutdowns are used as a financial smokescreen. And what I really believe they're doing here is using this as a way to pause the reports and manipulate the data. Basically, they're trying to cook the books, and this is what central banks are actually doing. They try to create a space to justify more liquidity injections, or in plain terms, more money printing, without admitting that the system is failing. So it's going to tie us into the deeper conversation about what this title is talking about as well, and how XRP is becoming a new standard for global liquidity, and naturally, how it's going to encapsulate the global financial system and decouple from traditional markets and, I would say, speculative frameworks. And that's what we see most people still tied to in the crypto ecosystem. So let's start with the government shutdown. David and Edo, I'd love to get your take on all of this, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth off each other. So you guys, whoever wants to start first.
Go ahead, David. I will leave you on this one.
All right. Well, I did a video about a week or so ago, and I really feel like a lot of this, this whole shutdown thing, I think a lot of it is coordinated. I know you got these parties that are kind of, they say, oh, we're arguing over this, that. But to me, it's just a dog and pony show. I think it's an absolute staged event. They could eliminate a debt ceiling and never have to deal with this nonsense again. But of course, that's not what they want, because, it gives them this ability to, kind of manipulate the market. They have the ability to kind of like squeeze a little bit of juice out of here and there and get all of their, special interest things all settled and stuff like that. And I really do believe that, when you look at the way in which this government is operating, it really doesn't matter. It's an excuse for the central bank to just pull the printing press and keep it going. Obviously, the market reacted once we got the news that, the shutdown is quasi over. I still think they need to vote on it. Maybe they voted on it now, but it looks like it's about a 90%, expectation that the whole thing is going to pass through. And remember this, guys, it's only going to be a shutdown till January, under what's being proposed. They're only going to delay this thing. So we're going to be dealing with it again in January. So look, if you're looking at from a market perspective and how the market has reacted to this current, well, you got something you actually can see a little bit into the future, what's probably going to happen in January. But for this ecosystem, I think we're going to see the ETFs come rolling out. Ripple may get its banking license. A whole bunch of things could happen between now and the end of the month that could have really big impacts on, where we're sitting at in terms of price. At least that's my thinking. The whole thing is dog and pony show, in all honesty. That's how I look at it. Political nonsense.
I'm with you, David. I'm not particularly paying too close attention on this subject. I think it can temporarily lead to government moving money into temporary emergency funds, for example, different categories. And I think we have to be paying more attention to what is really happening behind the scenes and not for the headlines. I think it's more about how far can they really push people before they panic. So it's a mass distraction. And that's why I have not been paying close attention to the government shutdown. How do you see that, Versan?
Listen, man, I mean, this is all, like he said, what do you say, pony show?
Right? A dog and pony show. You ever been to one?
Pony show. Okay. Well, to your point, what I call it is something more blunt, controlled opposition. Okay. They're simply playing games. This is what they've always done. And they are trying to cook the books, because if you look at the real economic data, the job losses are out of control. Inflation is out of control. Middle class is shrinking and shrinking. So without being too much doom and gloom, these are the facts, and people don't want to hear it. I get it. But that's why, again, it's so critical to understand the role of monetary hedge assets, gold, silver, real things, and increasingly in this ecosystem, even XRP, because these assets don't just preserve value, they position you and reposition you depending on your financial situation, how the other side of the financial equation is going to eventually unfold and play out. And the fiat system is designed to expand. So its supply is infinite, you could say. as how much money they have to print. When people ask me, hey, Versan, the market tanked, like, okay, well, if our job is, it's baked into the cake, we have to exponentially inflate the system. So asset prices, and this is asset inflation, they're continually going to rise. And we can even tie this into what Trump is saying now about the potential $2,000 stimulus check. Again, it's not politics. It's more optics, okay? They're looking about finding any reason to justify further central bank intervention. And this is the direct result and parallel of an echo we saw in 2019. During the financial crisis, the repo market took place. And what did they do? Liquidity dried up overnight. Central banks intervened. The Federal Reserve had to inject hundreds of billions of dollars to prevent interbank lending from collapsing. And then what happened? You had the emergency interventions disguised as stimulus. And that's what we're seeing again. So what I'm trying to say, and I know it's a bit of a big picture here, but they're just setting the stage for another massive 2020 money printing spree. So you're going to have your bull market, but I think it's going to be short-lived. And there are other reasons to explain that. So
yeah, I would agree 100%. I agree with your synopsis because, you know, to me, it's like throwing bread to the masses. They've been doing this for over 2,000 plus years. You know, when the Romans were collapsing, you know, they entertained people with games. And they would just have hundreds and hundreds of days of games. And a lot of the senators would come out. And of course, you know, this $2,000 stimulus, because they'd be throwing bread to the crowd. And that's what I really look at this. This $2,000 stimulus that is being proposed is for lower income individuals. You know, there's a cutoff of who would qualify and on and on and on. And it is just a distraction. The whole thing is a distraction because we know the current system is imploding. And they want a controlled demolition. That is exactly what I think is going down. They are kind of controlling as much as they possibly can the narrative until the whole thing unwinds. And like I've loved to say, and one of my big statements is the same guys who lit the fire will be the ones that show up with the hose, right? Oh, here's the solution, da 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 da. When it's been something they've been planning all along. So right on the head, you hit that one right on the head. This is exactly what they're doing. It's an orchestrated demise of the current system and the birthing of the new system. And you have to think these guys that have been controlling the strings, pulling the strings for the last 100 plus years, do you think they want to let go? No, they're the puppet masters. They want to get themselves well positioned into this new digital economy before they flip the switch.
I think we can summarize what we have spoke about with engineered financial restructuring. That's exactly what's happening now. It's not a financial crisis. There's no external circumstances. It's just they are reshaping the global economy. And the people in control, in other words, the central banks, they keep printing money. And with more stimulus checks on the rise, they hitting the markets, we're going to see more inflation. And that's what we have been seeing since the so-called pandemic, right? That all started in 2019. And since then, the world has changed dramatically. And the sad part is that the wages are not following the rise of the inflation. So people are not making more money. They are also committing fraud on the numbers. So the government is reporting. That's my take on that. You might agree or not. I want to hear your take, Versan and David. But I think that business are stopping hiring people. So that's also this problem here in Europe. Nobody wants to hire anyone. So there is this very risky environment that's escalating very badly. And I think it's just, as I said, it's an engineered financial restructuring with no cause. I mean, there's no war, there's no global tension that can justify such bad economical circumstances. And you can see that every time you go in the supermarkets, every time you go do your groceries or you go put gas on your car, everything is getting more and more expensive. But to say it's not a 5% inflation, is that we can even say things are doubling in price. I don't know about the United States, but I can name products that did a 3x in the last 2 years. It's more than 100% increase in the price. So it's really coming down to an aggregated of circumstances, and we can name a few of them with artificial intelligence taking over blockchain technology that's also disruptive technology. So they're really reshaping the global economy, and we have to prepare accordingly. That's why we need to stick to the plan. We need to have patience and hold on to the chosen digital assets. And we're talking about XRP, XLM, and a few others. But there will be an inevitable black swan event in the markets. You can say that the crypto markets are extremely fragile right now. It's a very weak environment. When you look, the liquidity is drying up. That's why the so-called bull run will be short-lived.
Yes.
However, there will be another bull run that will be the perpetual run that will be for XRP and few other digital assets. But if you are holding any crypto that's not tied to utility, I would run as far as I can, because that's going to be 100% devastating.
You said it beautifully. And, David, I loved how you said throwing bread to the masses. Essentially, that's what they're doing. Stimulus checks, right? Here's some bread, guys. Go invest into the market so we can short it. Take your wealth from you. But eventually, it's going to get to a point where even no matter, the Fed and the Treasury Department are operating as one entity, in my opinion. You could sugarcoat it all you'd like, how they're different, but they're actually operating as one in unity, because the same policies, the monetary policies that they're pushing on the market they're not really that different. If you think about it, they're just injecting liquidity, sustaining the system until its inevitable transition, right? But the window of opportunity for most people is shrinking indeed. And that's when you start to spark civil unrest, UBI infrastructure, central bank digital currencies, whatever you want to call it. It is inevitable to some point, because you're talking about 99% of the population, or let's be a little bit nice here, let's say 70% of the population that are not involved in this investments infrastructure. They don't really understand what's going on. And you're talking about a large class of people that don't have assets. They don't have savings. They don't understand what's happening. They just see inflation at the market, and they're working harder and harder for less and less. Eventually, that system is going to implode, because it doesn't matter how much money they're injecting into the system. It's just not working anymore for anybody else. And the fact that more and more people who don't have a clue what's going on are asking the question about what's happening to my currency, what's happening to my hard-earned money, it kind of shows you where we are. And that's kind of the turning point, that more and more people are figuring out that the party is over indeed, and they're all looking for alternatives. And that's kind of where XRP fits into the conversation, and what we're going to talk about here shortly. XRP fits in, and why the conversation matters so much is because XRP is designed, interestingly, for liquidity efficiency. And that means it's going to gradually consolidate the entire financial system. And if you look at Ripple, the company behind XRP, RippleNet, even Swell, we talked about this last week. They have actually cornered the entire traditional financial system. They have cornered the digital economy that is emerging. And that changes the whole conversation. It really does. They've put everybody in a position where you either get on board or you get left behind. I know that sounds a bit, opaque, but those are the facts. I want to hear what you guys have to say on that.
Well, I definitely think that a lot of people are being kept in the dark intentionally. Most people are oblivious. I think you're being very generous in saying that, maybe 70% of the pop. I think that probably 90+% of the population has absolutely zero clue about what's coming down the pike. And remember this, one of the biggest outcries during the government shutdown were all the SNAP benefits. Well, what is amazing to me is that 42 million people living inside the borders of the United States were getting these SNAP benefits. Now, when I originally on my channel, I had posted this, and a lot of people came back, well, half of that, they're probably not even US citizens. What difference does that make? Whether they're US citizens or not, they are inside the borders, and they are feeding off of the economy that exists inside these borders, and 42 million of them on SNAP benefits. I think you're right. I think they are going to have to bring in some sort of universal basic income, but that is the pathway to slavery. Bang. When they get people on that, of course, I do believe this is where you're going to see the decentralized identity come out, because to qualify, there's going to be all these issues. You're going to have to acquiesce to a decentralized identity, which is blockchain based, let's be honest. And they're going to be, tokenization will be going forward big time. And they are going to utilize this system in order to put people, like to social engineer, if you will, the societal behavior. Because look, if they're cutting the check to you and they're starting to dictate, okay, well, these benefits will only last for so long. You can only spend it on so much. Because with EBT and these SNAP benefits, they can even dictate right now what they spend that stuff on. So if people don't think that under a UBI system, they're not going to tell you what you can spend your money on, I believe they will. I think XRP, the way in which that it becomes a pathway to a certain measure of liberty for a lot of people. But I don't think a lot of people are going to be on board and will see it. I just don't. In fact, I think that even a lot of the people that are into this ecosystem will not be when it really matters. When it really matters, I think a lot of people are not going to be holding on to much of their XRP, and they're going to look back and think, why did I not really see the overall picture here, when we're doing our very best to tell them what it is? But it is coming. There's zero doubt about it. And you're right on the target again. Like, you got Ripple is out there. They got G Treasury. Now, G Treasury does a massive amount of corporate interbank financial transfers around the wide world. And the volume of it's almost tantamount to what Swift does in a big way. They went out and they have Ripple Prime now, which was Hidden Road as a clearing agency. They've got custody solutions with Matako and standard custody, and they just went out, made a new custody purchase. Recently, we know that Fortress and Citadel went and made a $500 million investment into Ripple. And then again, you have all the SPACs. Here's another big tell. You've got organizations out there, these special acquisition corps. The only reason they're existing is to bank strategic XRP reserves into the billions. Now, if these guys are out there willing to throw all that kind of money down, why are you and I being made to feel as anxious and as nervous and as scared as possible to put a few thousand bucks into it? I think there's a lot to be said right there, myself.
I love, David, how you mentioned the Romans before. And I think what's happening now is we have modern slavery, which is somehow different from what we had at the Roman Empire. At least the Romans, if you were a slave, you could purchase your freedom, and you have a lot of people that were slaves and they purchased their freedom. And you see, when you research history, you have some tomes where it's written libertus. It means that they actually eventually bought their freedom. And what we see right now in modern age is that I think these big corporations, the big tech companies, they really found ways to enslave people without actually enslaving them. And if you think about this, it can be even worse than the Roman times, because you have now these people that, at least when you were a slave to the Roman Empire, they would provide you with shelter, and food. Nowadays, you don't need to feed the slaves. You don't need to give the slaves properties. You just make them to pay their whole salary for actually to have a shelter. And that's what's happening here in Europe, where people can't afford a home anymore. They can't buy a home, let alone, the fact is they can't afford to buy a home, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for one single person to rent one bedroom apartment. So you have now cases in Europe where people are sharing apartments and they actually can only afford to rent a room. So that's even worse than the ancient slavery. So I think situation is getting very bad, and that's why they're gonna implement blockchain technology for the minimum universal income. I think that's inevitable. We have this entire artificial intelligence that, in my opinion, you can compare that to the Roman bread and circus. They were distracting the population with bread. Nowadays, I think not even the most tyrants emperors, let's talk about Gaius Caesar, I think he couldn't dream of so many control mechanisms as we have today, because people are being enslaved by their smartphones. They are being enslaved by every single technological device that we have. And what amazes me, not amazes me, what makes me more scared is that the people who should be worrying the most are the people who are not caring about what's happening. So people are paying more. There's inflation that's actually wiping out their savings, but people are paying attention to sports. People are paying attention to distractions. They are 24 hours per day on the TikTok, scrolling, watching content that's basically useless. So I think slavery never left. They just reinvented it. And I think we are going towards a very dark side for most of humanity. Now, the good news is that we have the information. And by having the information, by actually standing outside of this system, we can take the necessary actions to actually position ourselves and make sure that not only we are going to be retired, but our future generations. And I hope my grandchildren one day are going to be sitting on the beach drinking some coconut water and they're going to say, that's thankful. I'm thankful that he was able to actually understand this transformation and not be played like everyone else. It's so simple, right?
So powerful what you said. I wanted to tweet this the other day, but I don't know. I couldn't do it just because the kind of data I like to put out on X. I didn't want to like mix the two in, but I was going to say that the serpent has never left us. It's just gotten better at hiding itself, right? And without going too deep, I mean, there is a secret that's not widely known about Silicon Valley Bay. And if you look at the developers and the approach to artificial intelligence, it's certainly not just a tool. It's actually a fulfillment of a technological destiny. And I know this sounds crazy, but almost like building and releasing the next Messiah. So without going too much into detail here, if you think about the world that we already live in, modern day slavery, that's technically what it is. They've gotten better at hiding the mechanism, and that's really the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And it's still, interestingly, I know this also, oh my God, I can go on about this, but okay, the world, God's language, you could say, is really mathematics. That essentially is angelic code of reality itself. And if you think about AI, it's the exact opposite. It's man-made code that is designed to hack that reality. So when you look behind the efficiency and the convenience, there's certainly this deep ideology that's being played out in the world right now. And it's kind of tied into the whole transhumanism agenda that I don't want to unpack here fully, but it's important to be mindful of what we're participating in. So to your point, I think they are dehumanizing people with technology. And even Elon Musk once said this, that what we're manifesting AI without understanding it is very similar to manifesting demons. Do you remember when he said that on Joe Rogan's podcast? Anyways, this is where we are at that turning point of the convergence of these systems that can actually outthink and outmaneuver humanity.
Yeah.
So you have to be, critical of this. You got to think about it clearly. But that's why I've always thought that, XRP in a sense, and I know this is a bit off topic, but it seems that it could be the only way out, because what you see happening as this transition is unfolding, a lot of people are indeed getting left behind, but the system that you see being put into motion is one where essentially value is consolidating. It's replacing, to a degree, this debt expansion as the foundation of global finance. You have gold, for instance, thousands of years it's represented, and now it's becoming the anchor of this new system. Despite the fact that many people don't see this, I really don't care anymore. There is a connection there. It's a clear roadmap if you understand how the financial system works. So this is, again, why I'm always reiterating something physical, tangible outside of a digital system like gold. But the technology that we see with XRP Ledger, for instance, it's evolving into the role of the digital age. But again, it's consolidating value. So banks, governments, payment networks, they're going to use this technology for settlement. Yeah. They're going to use it for demand of on-demand liquidity. But that demand is naturally going to increase as it consolidates value, making it more liquid. All right. So there's a lot of moving pieces playing out right now. But I do believe that XRP is still on its way to becoming a global reserve asset. And we're going to get deeper into this as we go about this conversation.
Sure. I'd just like to share something right here, but that is a terrific point. And to your point, I'm just going to share this right here. I hope you guys can see if I can just share my screen here. So, we all know that BlackRock, have their thumb in every pie. And Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, I mean, this was only on October the 14th that this has come out, where they're going to tokenize everything. But when you go into this article and you actually see what they're talking about, and they're just saying, hey, it was ETFs. But listen to this. Fink outlined a strategy to access 4.1 trillion held in digital wallets globally by digitizing traditional financial products. He described the approach as repotting assets like ETFs, of course, exchange traded funds, into digital formats, pointing to the firm's tokenized money market fund and the expanding of digital asset platforms as examples. I mean, you cannot make this up, guys. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is coming and they are going to bring it fast. It is going to be, just it's going to be a freight train, and there's nothing stopping it. I mean, we can say, oh, this, that, and they will soft soap it as much as possible to get people to acquiesce. But I genuinely believe that there will be some sort of triggering event where they will get people on board just like that, because they're not going to have to push it. They're going to beg for it. Most people are going to beg for a new system because the old one is going to leave them in such disarray that it is going to be monumental, and they will absolutely beg for it. So you've got these, and look, BlackRock has almost, with all their subsidiaries, 8 to 13 trillion dollars of assets under management. These guys know, and they talk their book, because it wasn't but 3 years ago that Larry Fink was out there saying, yeah, not too many people I know are interested. No, come on, what a load of hogwash. But that's what's going on. And the problem with it is most people are completely indoctrinated by the Fifth Estate. They've lost their ability to genuinely critically think. Now, you say that to them, they're going to get all offended. But the reality is, when you get into a conversation with some of these people, and they start to give, their apologetic, like why they believe what they believe, you can almost hear verbatim what they've gotten off of, that when I say the Fifth Estate, the major news networks and all that's influencing them. I mean, they're using an argument where they've employed zero critical thinking, and I think it's going to be very easy to shepherd the majority of people right into this situation that we're going for.
David, sorry to interrupt you, but 4 years ago, they were lining up to get this injection here. That's all I will say about this.
Yeah,
you were begging them, please give me.
Yeah, even
they would pay
the
to get it before the others.
That's of course why I say they're going to beg for the solution. They're going to beg for it, and they're going to hand it to them on a silver platter.
Can I also add something to this? I mean, we've had this discussion so many times about institutions like BlackRock and JP Morgan. Once again, for the audience, they're never going to publicly telegraph their strategy or their motives, right? In the higher echelons of finance, I'm telling you, secrecy is the name of the game. I'll call this strategic silence. And that's simply because the public, they naturally kind of lean towards something perception, but through repetition. And what narratives are being pushed more than ever? It seems inclusive, but it's actually divisionary if you really think about it. But the repetition of Bitcoin, Ethereum across every major media channel, it's not random. It's conditioning process. That's all. And that's technically why the public doesn't really understand the other cornerstones happening in the digital financial ecosystem. So when you think about it, the assets that they've been talking about, they're not really built for what's coming. I think it's built for what's part of the problem. I mean, look at the early experimentation around Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm just saying. I mean, listen, I just follow what the institutions do. That's all. And I tried my best with you guys to put this out for everybody else to follow, but they lack interoperability, they lack scalability. Interestingly, they even lack compliance infrastructure that's necessary to support what we're talking about here. So I think that's why XRP is still consolidating the market. And I don't know how many times I've said XRP, probably more than I've said my wife's name, and that's not a good sign. But it's so obvious at this point, and I think where this is all going essentially is a new structure, okay? But more importantly, XRP And I hate to sound repetitious, but it really sits in the center of all of this. And we've broken this down so many times. But it makes you wonder also what's going to happen before we get there. And I'll tell you, I really think if you look at traditional financial markets, we're already entering a phase right now, and this much is clear, where liquidity is the new source of power, you could say. Um, and the assets that are capable of bridging liquidity across these systems, and I'm talking about from fiat to crypto, other digital assets, from debt to tokenized value, that's going to define the new monetary sovereignty system. That's really why we're seeing this push from regulators, from central banks, and even institutions now, because the bridge is about building and bridging things in real time. And again, XRP is at the center of all of it. It's a cross-border remittance protocol.
Love what you said about Bitcoin, Versan. And yes,
Of course
both
you do.
Bitcoin and Ethereum, they lack all the they lack all the scalability elements. So basically, they can't function as a currency. BTC is not even according to its own white paper, a peer-to-peer decentralized, peer-to-peer electronic cash system that doesn't add up. But there is something that both Ethereum and Bitcoin don't lack. That's traceability, and that's exactly why the introduction of blockchain technology came over a decade before. So let's talk about this. I think we have people that are newcomers to the channel, people that perhaps is the first time that they're watching us. So that is definitely something. I know it sounds that we are repeating ourselves, but think about this. They want to get rid of cash transactions. Now, what is a blockchain? Basically, it's a sophisticated database. If you want to make it very simple, it's basically a database that stores every single transaction from the first transaction ever. So every block is connected to each other, and we call the first transaction ever the Genesis block. That goes for BTC. XRP also has a Genesis block. So they found this perfect way to both attract people to the new system and in the same way promising freedom. But everyone forgets that every single transaction can be traced down, and that's exactly the opposite of cash transactions. So basically, release the beta coin, the beta test coin, allow the most brilliant minds on these planets to try to enrich themselves while exploiting bugs. So we have all the developers, all the people, brilliant people working on this test net, that's Bitcoin. And then years later, you come with the final product that's called XRP. As simple as it is, I don't know how to explain this financial system in a more simple terms than what I just did.
Well, you don't really have to, I think, Edo. You've explained it very well. It's just that right now there is a counteractive campaign of disinformation to genuinely keep people in the dark, or at least instill in them a measure of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That is a coordinated effort. We know that it is. We've caught people that are being paid to issue this kind of information, and it literally has all the hallmarks of a organized agency, if you will, campaign. Now, I myself, when Bitcoin was created, I was a senior federal officer working in the underground economy as an investigator. And I can tell you right now that, the whole narrative around these assets when they first came out was how they were being used for all the nefarious use cases. And that narrative went out there, and a lot of the individuals that were utilizing this for that mechanism, a means of consideration that they felt was not trackable, well, it became the most traceable thing that there was. And we were able to do that. We were able to find out who was doing what, where the money was going, on and on and on. And it was something that we could easily see. And so, but they believed at that time that it was untraceable. Remember, a lot of people didn't even understand how distributed ledger technology worked back then. And they looked at these as mechanisms for doing that. And a lot of the underground economy, a lot of, people that aren't so nice were the first adopters of it because of that whole narrative that it was, an untraceable, decentralized, separated monetary system from the powers that be, when in fact it was literally created by those people in order to, have this kind of dragnet, if you will. Because
Exactly.
SHA-256 was not publicly available in 2009, and it was developed by the NSA, and it became available, and we know that Bitcoin was built off of SHA-256.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's why it's so important to emphasize what Ripple has actually done. Sure, quietly, but strategically over a decade now. They have cornered the market. They've cornered the traditional financial system. They've cornered the digital economy simultaneously. Swell this year alone confirmed it. Those who pay attention, do their research, can feel it. It's not just another conference. It was more of a declaration that the infrastructure is already in place. I don't know if anyone heard his speech. In fact, it's going to be on my next video tomorrow, the full speech of what he said at Ripple Swell. But Ripple has effectively bridged every sector that matters: central banks, commercial banks, payment providers, asset managers, and even tokenization platforms. So when you start looking at the traditional systems, for years, RippleNet has been positioning itself, its infrastructure, as that connective tissue for global finance. And that's why the rails that allow value to move easily as information, it's not speculation. That's what's going to dominate the new ecosystem. They've solved the core problem that the legacy couldn't fix, and that legacy systems actually created. Settlement finality, really. And if you start to combine distributed ledger technology with regulatory grade compliance, that's when you basically turn XRP into a neutral bridge asset that financial institutions can actually use within these existing frameworks. So you don't have to make much changes. You just need to make the adjustments that are needed to corner the system, not necessarily by disrupting it, but by upgrading it from the inside out. And if you fast forward to today and what we're watching, the whole world is catching on to what we've been talking about here. Again, Ripple cornered the digital economy. So you're hearing a lot of the breadcrumbs start to fall. And sure, you see these complementary relationships like with Chainlink, tokenization, interoperability. But you have to understand, that's why I have this displayed here. What's actually happening under the surface is that these new infrastructures are plugging into RippleNet. And that's where it changes, again, the dynamic of the conversation. They're not competing with the XRP ecosystem. They are complementing it. They are feeding on the data and the smart contract capabilities that enhance the overall functionality of these select assets. It's very interesting.
No, it's very true, and it's this is you're supplying absolute evidence. This is not speculation. This is not conspiracy theory. It's not, the speculation can be in the assets and their value going forward, sure, but in terms of what's coming and the infrastructure that is being built and is being utilized, that's not speculation. That's a fact. And it is right there before our very eyes. And there's a whole lot more information. And Edo, you had brought out a ton of information that was just amazingly valuable, on X, and you got punished for it. You got punished for it. And so you have to ask, okay, why would they not want people to be aware? It is out there and available, but why would they put so much effort into, creating just a false narrative or a distraction to it? It's beyond belief. And the reality of what we're going into and the fundamentals of what it is what's given, us such confidence, myself, at least such confidence in where we're at and what we're doing. It's not an investment just in the sense of, oh, okay, what kind of return? No, it's an investment into my security into the future, as because this is coming, and like Versan had said there, it is absolutely unavoidable. There is no avoiding it. We are evolving into a new world order, and these guys are calling it themselves, the WEF, and different ones have coined the term the fourth industrial revolution. Well, what happened with every other previous industrial revolution? Well, there were fortunes made, to be sure, but there were a lot of control mechanisms that were brought into place each and every time. You think of income tax. Remember, during World War I and all that, after that, a lot of income tax was brought in, wasn't it? You know, we had a lot of income tax. Income tax didn't exist the way that it does today. You know, and so a lot of these control mechanisms are being brought into play, and I do believe that the next system will, like Edo, you were saying, like if these guys had a back in the day Tiberius or Caesar, whoever these guys were, they could never have dreamed of exercising or wielding the kind of control that will be available to these global leaders. Never in their lives.
Absolutely true. And you mentioned income tax. Now let me bring something here that I want to share, and that's happening across Europe. So France proposes citizenship-based taxation, and I don't think we are that far from a universal global tax regime. So it's very, very concerning in my perspective, and I want to share this especially with Europeans. I think you should get as soon as possible to the most friendly jurisdiction that you can. That's what I am doing right now. I can quickly share my experience. I am right now in Cyprus working closely with a law firm that's based here, and I'm moving my taxes to Cyprus. I'm Italian by nationality, and I don't know when Italy is going to come with similar proposal as France. I know from a fact that is on the talk about Netherlands for 2027. They want to do the same. So I'm taking action. I'm not waiting for that. That's why right now I'm working to move my tax regime to Cyprus. That's the best jurisdiction right now, in my opinion. So if anyone is interested, feel free to reach me out in private if you are based in Europe. Now, how is that going, Versan and David, in the United States? How is that going with taxation?
Well, if I can just jump in on that, I've spent a lot of years in Canada in the tax department there. And I do know this, there is something there, like let's say, for instance, you wanted to leave Canada. There is something called a deemed disposition, where the government just makes it a deeming provision is a legal fiction. So basically, only a government can deem something to be so that is really not so. Let me give you an example. Let's say you took a civic organization, and they have a bylaw against nudity on the beach. Well, but for all intents and purposes, nudity could be a string bikini or whatever. Well, that we know that that's not the genuine definition of nudity, but according to the law, it's deemed to be that. So in Canada, there's this whole deemed disposition that they act as if you try to leave the country and you think, okay, I'm getting out of Canada, so I'm not going to pay my taxes. I'm not going to have to pay this whole big capital gains. I'm not going to sell any crypto. You know what they do? They deem that you have sold it on the day that you left and rebought it on the same day. So they get you with a massive exit tax during that. And I know in the United States here, you got states like the California that want to impose exit taxes and all this kind of stuff. And so taxation is becoming such an onerous burden for most people that it's to destroy, in my mind, what would motivate a person to go out there and actually, really get out there and be an entrepreneur, do this and that, when you're just going to be taxed to death. But these taxations, and they literally have think tanks set up thinking of ways in which to create new and diverse types of taxation. And for me, it's not that we don't want to have nice roads, good lights and all that. I appreciate that. But the form of taxation that we have now, it is just getting more and more. The way I kind of look at it is, it's almost a legalized form of theft, because they are making it almost impossible for you to truly walk away benefiting from your own investments. So, they tax us on our income, right? Then we get taxed on what we spend. Now we can take our after tax income and we can invest it and take a risk, and they get as much, if not more, profit from that risk than we get.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, no, you do know, and you're absolutely right. But this is something we've all been warning about as far as technology. The technology is indeed a mechanism to track, trace, and tax you on everything without your consent. And if we're still keeping this baked into the pie as far as the debt-based system, they only have one solution to raise taxes without telling you. And this is why you see inflation. So, I mean, it's all tied in together. I mean, if you're going to have a real monetary reset, this is why I'm always voicing gold. Okay. I hate to be repetitious, but gold is so important, especially if you are going to have a financial reset, even for the XRP community. I'm talking about the other pundits out there and influencers. If you believe in this XRP reset, then there has to be some underlying value to it. Okay. So gold is really what keeps centralized institutions in check. That's why they took it off the dollar, the gold standard, right? So taxation in a digital economy is inevitable, in my opinion. It's really scary, and it's hard to really see how this is going to play out, but it's going to be baked into the cake. And with all these centralized systems, and you have the digital IDs, and not to be political here, but we're trying to get Catherine Austin Fitz on the show for like 3 years now, Jim Rickards, a few others. And some of these people are afraid to come on our show because I think we're going to challenge them a little bit compared to some of the people I've seen Jim Rickards and Catherine Austin Fitz go on these shows, and they don't ask good questions, but they have such a large audience. I think that's very strange, but we have a smaller audience and we still try to ask these good questions. And this is one of them. Trump administration is actually accelerating the digital grid. Nobody sees it. Okay. So without getting too political, people are like fighting for their own enslavement. And that's just a blunt truth without sugarcoating it. But then again, that's why I'm always reiterating once again, gold, silver, you need physical, tangible assets. That's sovereignty outside of a digital system, because we truly don't understand how this is going to unfold. All I can explain here is the technology, how it's consolidating wealth, how it gets to a high price, why it's probably the best investment, because everything we see happening from tokenized real world assets, stable coins, central bank digital currencies, the DeFi infrastructure, it's being built within the RippleNet framework, whether directly or indirectly. And that's the part most people keep missing. It's RippleNet that's actually the operating system of this emerging financial web, you could say. And XRP is indeed their native liquidity layer that powers it. So the system that we're talking about here is, its design is becoming self-reinforcing. And that's because XRP operates in drops. It allows fractionalization of settlement at scale. That means more and more value can move with less and less XRP. Whether it be tokenized bonds, securities, it doesn't matter, even CBDCs. But the whole taxation aspect of it, guys, we were going to not talk about this in this conversation, but it's inevitable. You're going to be taxed, especially in a digital centralized system. And the technology was supposed to free us, but it never did. Okay. You're cheering BlackRock now with, getting involved in all of this. So there's a conflict of interest here. I remember 5-6 years ago, the same people in the XRP community were saying, go be your own bank, go be your own bank. And now they're here cheering BlackRock and JP Morgan. I've simply been reporting it. There's a difference. But my message hasn't changed from the very beginning. You need physical, tangible assets. That's the only way you can actually fight the banks at their own game on their turf. I don't know. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds. But guys, I want to dive a bit deeper about how XRP actually decouples from the broader crypto market. Maybe you guys can provide some insight on that.
Yeah, I think it will definitely. I think that the way XRP will decouple is that, when you're seeing a lot of the, like, okay, if you take Bitcoin or non-utility assets that have super high value, and we watch a unwinding of the current system, I think a lot of those they're not going to hold their water. And I do believe they're going to literally collapse. And as a result of that, it's going to be the whole phoenix rising out of the ashes where everything else is burning up. They're going to need an answer. And I believe that answer is going to be providing instant global liquidity in an agnostic system not tied to any government around the world, because I don't think people will be prepared to trust another world reserve currency tied to a nation state. I just don't think they will. And as a result, they're going to want to have a system that is going to present an agnostic form of monetary value. And remember what money is. It's a store of value. It's a unit of account. It's a medium of exchange. And of course, we know XRP satisfies all of that, right? 1 million drops per XRP. It's definitely a store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account, all of those things. And not only that, you can literally tokenize practically anything on the XRP ledger. And remember, its primary use case is a bridge asset between, CBDCs or whatever form of value you want it to be. It can act as that bridge asset. Well, that in and of itself, that functionality alone is monumental under the current system. I mean, the current system, we know, had Nostro, Vostro accounts, the ours, yours accounts with banks and all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the biggest crises in the world right now, of course, is liquidity. And that's why we're just watching all of this, massive amount of money printing and the M2 money supply just going bonkers right now. Well, it's the devaluation of the currencies, but it is the appreciation of anything measured against it. Gold, for instance, dollars. Did the dollar go down? Did gold go up? I mean, come on, that's a big time deal. That's why we're seeing a flight to gold the way that we are right now, is because, these central banks are betting against their own system. They're the ones buying it. And so that's where, and maybe it's going to come out like a special drawing right, an ESDR or something like that. But I think it's that utility and value, how it becomes the parachute for the new digital economy that will cause the decoupling to really take effect. That's when I think we'll really, really see it. But I do believe that, once its utility is fully realized, yeah, it's going to decouple from a lot of these other. It's going to probably be its own indices in one respect. It'll be, see, we measure XRP against dollars right now. When anyone's talking about XRP, oftentimes say, well, $100, $1,000, $10,000. Well, you're still measuring it against the very system that it is replacing. When it really decouples, you will not be measuring it against dollars. It's going to be what in and of itself is going to have value. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I really think. That's when I think we'll see such a massive decoupling is going to be. It's going to be a flight to safety. At least that's how I think it's going to go down.
You're right.
Totally agree, David. And you are definitely asking the right questions. And I would add to that, did Bitcoin really go up in price? Because I would argue that $70,000 Bitcoin was more valuable in 2020 than 100,000 per Bitcoin in 2025 when we bring inflation into the equation. So we can even argue that we had a first degree decouple from XRP in relation to BTC. I will remind you that at the beginning of this cycle, XRP was below 50 cents. So it has gone up substantially against BTC. That's also first degree decouple, I would say. But the real decouple will come once real liquidity comes into the ledger. It's not when ETFs are approved, although, of course, ETFs can open some windows. But we are talking here about when XRP becomes effectively a global reserve currency.
There you go.
And when that happens, the entire game will change. And you have to think about replacing Nostro Vostro accounts. That's on Ripple's white papers from many years ago, although they don't talk about this openly anymore. But they made their intentions very clear back in 2012, 2013, when XRP was first released. Now, the fact that they don't talk about this openly, but every single action they take is aligned with this original white paper. You see how BTC has diverged from the white paper itself, but XRP still follows exactly what Ripple told back in 2012, 2013. But of course, right now they are much more cautious with their words and how they rephrase sentences. But you had Brad Garlinghouse that goes on stage and says XRP is effectively designed, and I quote him, ipsis verbis, to be a global reserve currency. So once liquidity really kicks in on the ledger and XRP settles, let's say, global debts, or once replace Nostro Vostro accounts, I think we're really going to see the real power of XRP. And of course, it will not follow this decaying system that we call the bull run. It will not make any sense that we're going to have an XRP bull run. It will be a perpetual cycle that will be measured in how much liquidity is coming on the system, how much money is flowing on the ledger, how many transactions per second are being executed. And I am sure Versan is releasing a new video tomorrow. I don't want to make any spoiler, but he's going to break that down in detail. So I highly recommend everyone to watch it. And Versan, why don't you answer your own question now? I'm very interested on your take on this one, man.
Well,
I don't want to give any spoilers because you did show me some interesting stuff when we had a call yesterday.
You know, it's funny. I probably said that here on the podcast a few times, but this time it's a little more macro, breaks it down a bit more. But thank you for that. I really appreciate it. To your point, Edo, again, to understand how XRP actually evolves into a global reserve asset, there are a few pillars that all must align together. Number one is sovereign adoption. We can check that off the box. Same thing we talked about last week. Regulatory clarity, not a security check. Clarity Act is on its way. We're going to get there, and we can just check that as a trend forecast. All right. And then institutional recognition, we could check that too, because it's happened all over the world. But ultimately, it's going to come to a degree from the IMF. And we know for a fact that Ripple has been working with the IMF for a very long time. They've just been quiet about it. So what is my point to all of this, answering my own question, is that XRP is in a completely different category. If it's built, to David's point, for global settlement, that means it's not speculation. That means it's not even tied to the markets that we will eventually see. And eventually, just as gold decoupled from the US dollar, XRP is going to have to decouple from crypto markets and from the volatility that's driven by retail sentiment. Retail doesn't have any impact in this, in my opinion, and neither does market cap. When you look back at historical context, gold used to be pegged to the dollar. It was considered to be a subordinate asset, a store of value that backed the system that it represented. Why was there a decoupling in 1971? It became a mirror of the system's weakness, right? So XRP, in a sense, in my opinion, is walking that same path. And then soon, I don't think it's going to be correlated to the Bitcoin market cycles. I don't think it's going to revolve around having narratives, or, like Brad Garlinghouse famously just said recently, the store of value narrative, the story behind it, okay? So it will have to decouple. It will have to emerge as a real utility player. And to your point, Edo, institutional liquidity flows. Ladies and gentlemen, that's macroeconomic necessity. So it means it's inevitable. And I think that intersection is becoming clearer and clearer by the day. So
we can mirror this analogy that you made with gold. Why gold was being heavily suppressed, however, right now is one of the best performing assets, because central banks are accumulating large sums of gold. Now apply that principle for XRP and you're going to have the final answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They say history repeats but rhymes differently. I mean, this is no different. Yes. Please.
Yeah, you got the same principle. David. By the way, we're getting close to 60 minutes, 1 hour. Yeah. So perhaps we can jump to final thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to just say that, you know, I think you guys are right over the target. I absolutely believe that's why I was saying about the ESDRs. The IMF is going to be involved, or maybe it's going to be, you know, an evolution of what the International Monetary Fund is. It could change into something different, but definitely I do believe in the agnostic implementation of XRP as a global monetary instrument that people will put confidence in, because I don't think they're going to put confidence in a nation state again. And I don't think the infrastructure is there for any other nation state in the world to be a reserve currency. Like, you know, I just don't. But, you know, the fact is, you know, you're right about the whole, you know, the evidence is before us. And that's why I brought up the SPACs earlier. These guys are putting billions of dollars in to buy up XRP and hold it as a reserve. And there's about 11 different SPACs right now. You know, not just Evernorth. Evernorth might be the most well known, but there are about 11 different ones. And, you know, why do you think they would do that? Why would you create a special, you know, acquisition corp just to go out and acquire XRP and hold it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but they're doing it. And so like that to me is probably one of that gives me the greatest level of confidence, and I'm going to hold it. I've told people, look, I may not ride it all the way up to $10,000, but I definitely will ride it all the way down to zero.
You know, okay. Because, if you need to sell your XRP, you could sell it to me.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I mean? But my point in saying that is that, look, I am so confident about where we're at and where we're going with this asset that I would never, you know, I'd be willing to ride the thing to zero, because I do think we are going to see it really come into play, and it is going to have a massive, massive impact on, you know, providing security for the world and liquidity. I really do. But having said all that, I guess my final thoughts would be, don't leave it to chance, guys. You know, to the audience, really take your time. Go out there, fact check everything we're saying. Go dig the information up for yourself. I love to say, you know, oftentimes that the answers we find for ourselves are the ones we trust the most. And so I would just say, look, don't even take our word for it. Make up your own mind, but definitely you owe it to yourself to really get in and find out what the heck is going on, because it'll come upon you so fast you will not even have time to digest it. I genuinely believe it'll be light, it'll be so quick, and most people will not transition well. Most won't. And when has the greatest level of volatility happened at any time in history? It's at the end and the beginning, always. End of something, beginning of something else, greatest level of volatility. And it's usually the greatest level of uncertainty, the greatest level of fear. And the majority of people literally always seem to just go right over the cliff, right? They just follow the herd. I'm just saying, look, I would encourage you, don't follow the herd. Just research it, find out. The information's available. I mean, we've been able to find it, so certainly you guys can. And that's what I encourage. And also I would encourage this. Take advantage of, you know, the what other people have learned, in the sense of, you know, I know Versan, Edo, myself, we all offer, you know, those opportunities to just, you want to pick our brain? We can take coaching sessions and teach various things, but it's teaching you how to think. It's not telling you what to do. And I think that's an important distinction. And a person can become a lot wiser, sharper, more prepared for what's coming. You do not have to be a victim. You just don't.
Here come the haters. I'm just kidding.
That's okay. Let them
No,
hate.
I love them at this point. You know, I like to put people in their place if I can. But, you know, with this, I really do want to take another moment to thank every single one of you for all your support and what we're doing here on the Turning Point. We've been getting incredible feedback. This community is growing every day because people like you are all paying attention. You're sharing this. And I think that you're thinking critically. You're refusing to just accept surface level narratives. And tomorrow, I hope you guys go watch my video. I'll be releasing this video breaking down exactly how XRP does reach higher valuations, and more importantly, why it mathematically actually matters, and how it's inevitable, in my opinion. Put a lot of work into making sure that the visuals and explanations behind it are very clear, detailed, and grounded in a reality as far as utility and liquidity. So please go ahead and support that. Edo, do you have any final words?
Final words, I think there's an important message. I got 2 emails today from people asking me if I am back to my X account. I want to be very clear. I am still suspended, so don't be scammed by fake accounts pretending to be myself. And yes, I made a lawsuit against X. They were enforced to delete over 500 fake accounts. And they deleted, but these accounts, they keep coming back. And ironically, I can't come back myself. I'm still suspended. So please, I am not on X, so don't fall for any scams. And also watch for the comments, because I notice there's a lot of bots and people trying to steal your crypto. So be very, very aware of that. And finally, I want to send a special thanks for the audience. I know we get a lot of positive messages about this community, and we're going to see you guys next week. Also, drop a comment. Let us know from where you are watching us. I know that helps us with the algorithm. So this live session is going to reach more people. And I think from my end is everything.
All right. Well, please take care of yourselves. Stay vigilant, stay grounded. Remember, these markets are unpredictable. We really don't know how this is going to play out, but we are indeed living through a historic transition, and it's going to reward those who are prepared, not panicking. So keep some gold, keep some cash, some silver, food, water on hand. Always have a weapon. Defend yourself. You got to prepare for any inevitable outcome. And I think that's the best way to stay resilient and survive through whatever comes next. Okay. Until next week, guys, thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon. Okay. Please be careful.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care, guys.
Mm-hmm.